All right, welcome everyone. Good morning. Happy Monday. Here we go again. All the good things. So I wanted to start off with some like survey data sharing, which is fun, but we haven't done yet. And we'll see if I can do this correctly the way that I'm thinking of. Zoom is like not working with me right now. Sorry. Get out of here. Where are y'all? There we go. Fucking full screen. Okay. Cool. So let's have me share. I changed like the settings around for mid mods and now things are just weird, but here we are. Okay. That's not what I want to show you. What do y'all see right now? Adam? Yes? Good.
Yeah, we see Adam.
Okay. Everything's a little different, but bear with me. Okay. So now you probably see this sheet. So I just wanted to like share some of these responses that are kind of fun. Over here on the left, we've got like what you would be famous for. Being a smartass is a good one. Streaming, quad skating. I mean, these are pretty good diverse bunch of responses. Anyone see any that they are impressed with? Being my own stuntman, but I would hire a stunt double to do my tricks. I think those conflict, so I think you misunderstood the question there, whoever that was. Cool. Acting, nice. Rabble rousing. So yeah, you all want to be famous for pretty big variety of things. And then here are some of our animal personas. There's some Lion King themes that comes through. Um, there's a lot of different animals that we've got here, and I kind of wanted to show this just so you could like see that we do look at this stuff, even like the silly stuff, and then we try to look at the kind of like more personal or direct feedback, and see if like there's ways that we can address that. If it needs to be addressed like via a DM, we'll do it that way, or if we think like we can like make an adjustment of some kind of like timing. One thing I've heard, and there's kind of like a theme, is like more small group time, and like totally like I think that that is valuable time for y'all. um, as far as time with instructors in small groups, it's kind of like the independent challenge is the closest thing. And then this week, I think I'll probably like looking at the calendar. I'll probably do like some kind of optional review on like maybe like Wednesday afternoon or something during work time, or Thursday afternoon. And we'll kind of do like a vote of, hey, would you like more time on this, or this? And then do like a smaller group that's like very specifically focused on one thing. So hopefully that sounds good. Here's some more stuff. I like that someone put that I'm a pit bull because I have a pit bull, and then the next person said a dog. So I'm like, great. All right, pit bull dog. But yeah, this is, please fill out the survey, and I'll start sharing more and more with you all, just so that, yeah, so you can see this stuff. Cool. Any questions on surveys or like stuff that's come up?
I like how Mike is a cat. I've seen that a few times.
F a cat. And we got way less cat is a cat. We got this one. I expect you to get this a lot. Like, yes, I expect that too. But this mod, we got less cat responses. So you all are seeing new sides of cat's animal persona, which I like. All right, cool. So let's get into some modules. Yeah. Cool. So we're going to talk about modules, like their use case, and then I want to just like look real quick at these links. So there's 2 links that provide the documentation for both comparable and enumerable, which you have been using throughout this mod, and those are actually implemented as modules in the Ruby language. So I just wanted to highlight these 2 links because like I feel like sometimes they could get missed, and I'm gonna like take some time to like look through this, but I just wanted to like expectation set that like, look, we're going to look at like how a module is implemented in Ruby, and I think it's pretty cool. Cool, yeah. So some of the keywords today, you've heard most of them other than probably Mixin. And so there are 2 ways that modules are generally implemented in Ruby. One is a namespace. So this is to like prevent naming clashes when you have production applications that are like very large. Like if you think, I can think of one for like what we're going to do today, and we deal with like images. So it could be like you might have like some kind of like image generator class or image creation class, but you might have that in a bunch of different spots in your program. So you would maybe like use a namespace like profile image generation, like post image generation. And so that would be like the one way you could avoid naming clashes is by using a module to to namespace the whatever the application is, so that you don't have naming clashes in classes that are like kind of the same or doing the same thing. So we're not going to talk about those today. You'll see them in mod 2 and mod 3, and they're like, it's very simple to implement them. It's literally just a name. It's like a name at the front of your class is kind of how you can think of it, so that the class doesn't clash. We're going to talk about modules as mixins. And so when we say mixin, this is like not just a Ruby term. This is like a developer community term, and it's like a way that we like mix in some behavior into our classes and give them some sort of desired functionality. And so that's how we are going to use modules. It's, I would say, like slightly more powerful way to use them in Ruby, and it's a way that you can like include the same behavior in multiple classes, multiple objects. Cool. So yeah, I want you all to like think to yourself on this warm up. So let's take like 5 minutes. Let's have you kind of like in your journal or in your doc where you keep notes, whatever it is, just jot down some answers to this question, and then we will hear from a few of you. So let's take 5 minutes on this, and we'll be back at 14 to share. All right, it looks like most of you are finished just by the squares. Yeah, so I'd love to hear from a few of you. Let's hear from musical squares. Let's hear from Saren. What do you know about modules already? And then based on the name, what's your idea of what they do?
Yeah, don't know a ton about modules based on the name. Sort of like a broad definition of smaller pieces, like interacting and building off of one another to maybe create something bigger.
Totally cool. Yeah. So yeah, I like that you said like kind of like some pieces chunked together, like maybe building off one another. I would say like the idea of a module is like just like let's look at the definition. That's a better idea. Because I bet that it being defined is better than me just talking. Module definition. Cool. So I like showing this because it makes sense to me, like looking at it as like a self-contained kind of like chunk of things. So set of standardized parts or independent units that can be used to construct a more complex structure. So that's kind of like what Saren was saying, like building on one another to make up more of a whole. But you can think of it as like a couple of things that belong together and are chunked up together in a way that like makes sense for these in Ruby, these behaviors to be chunked up together. Cool. All right, let's take a crack at the second one. So football players and soccer players both have unique attributes. What behaviors might they share? Let's go with Hash.
Some behaviors that they might share would probably be like, running, jumping, kicking. Both of them have a kick ability, so that's pretty much all the ones I came up with.
Yeah, no, I think those are like perfect and ideal and the same ones I remember hearing last time. So this is yeah, it's the idea is, especially if we think of like if we're creating a football player and a soccer player within the same program, right? But and we know that they have to do all of these things and they're going to behave pretty much the same in a few different ways, right? Like run, kick, jump, whatever it is. Like those unique behaviors are, I guess they are unique's not the right word. Those behaviors are parts that we want to be able to define once, right? And then we want each player to reuse the same type of behavior in a way that we've only defined it once as the developer, but our two separate classes of football and soccer players can kind of like both have access to those behaviors. Cool. Yeah, and then how about some behaviors shared between students and instructors? Let's hear from Brett.
I did writing, reading, and learning. Those are three that I did.
Totally. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up this learning one, right? Because like that's something we're constantly doing from one another. But if we were to like get down to brass tacks of like how do we implement learning, there would be like a number of steps, right? And they would look very similar for both you and I. And so we'd want to define those steps one place and then include those steps with both of us. If we were designing a program where we had an instructor and a student class, we'd want to include those behaviors for reading, writing, learning. Those are great examples. Cool. Questions on like why we'd only want to define something once and then include it?
Would it be because you want it to be consistent?
Yeah, I think it's like twofold. That's certainly one of the reasons, right? Like we want this behavior to be consistent and look the same, right? Like we want to know what it does, and we want to be able to depend on it in the same way. So if you define something on a module, then you can both. It's kind of like, I guess it's threefold. So consistency behaves the same way. We only have to define it once, right? So developers by nature kind of lazy, only want to do things once, and make it make the most of it and make it as efficient as possible. And then three, especially like this will come into play like while you're at Turing and really in your career, it's like you want to be able to test it and only have to really test it once, and then now you can like include that tested behavior anywhere you need it. All right, and so yeah, that's the threefold there. So let's keep going. Okay, so this is like the things that I want you to pound into your head, like about modules to start. It's like it's like these 4 bullet points. Sorry, let's look at them as mixins first. So Ruby implements mixins with modules. I've kind of talked about this already, and they allow us to share behavior between objects. We hit on that. I just want to repeat it because the idea of a mixin is how Ruby implements shared behavior with modules. All right. So we won't really say mixin a ton besides like kind of in this lesson probably, but you can think of it as like I'm using a module to mix in my desired behavior. Okay, now these 4 bullet points are the ones that I really want you to like hear and know. They look like classes, but they only hold methods. So the biggest difference between a module and a class is that a module doesn't have state. There aren't any instance variables that it's holding. Everything will be written as a method, and a method will be able to be called on whatever object that we've included and mixed in the module into. All right, so modules are only storing behavior, don't store state. That is the biggest thing to remember about them. And so because they don't store any state, they can't be instantiated. So you can't do like my module.new here. It won't work. That's not how we deal with modules in Ruby. So the way that we would deal with them is we would include the behavior on a class, and then when that class is instantiated and we have an object of that class, then we can also use the methods that we've included that are defined on the module. All right, so let's look at some examples. Let's clone down this repo here in the lesson plan. And yeah, Rachel Warbelow made this. She is fantastic former teacher here that hopefully you all get a chance to interact with at some time because she's great. I taught Mod Zero with her for quite a while. Maybe you all had her in, no, probably not. Probably not. Anyways, so I'm gonna clone this down. It's called Ruby module example. Cool. I can change my branch name with git branch -m master main. Cool, that updates it to be main. And yeah, let's look at that. So I'll open Atom. Okay. So we've got a photo class. It's got some specific behavior that we can see. And then we've got a status update class, which has some similar behavior that we can see. And I think I kind of want to do this. Yeah,
Hey,
probably.
Tim, did you want us to clone this on our locals as well?
Yeah, I would say like clone this down locally. You all clone it, and then we're gonna do some of it together, and then some of it like with y'all in breakout rooms. Cool. So how about this? Let's take a quick break. It's 23. Let's come back at 28, and then I'll walk through like kind of like doing some of this stuff in Praia, and then probably do a little bit in a runner file, and then kind of like allow you all to go forth and do some things. Cool. Yeah, let's come back at 28.
You're muted, Tim.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's 28, so let's jump back into it. So I'm at the root of this Ruby module example directory, And I just want to jump into Praia and start trying some of this stuff out. I assume that it works because it's in the lesson plan. So that's what I'm going to do, is just kind of jump in. Cool. And this is kind of like always a decent way to start experimenting with a code base that you're unfamiliar with. Like, start with an object, right? And call the methods that are available on that object. So in this case, we have our status update. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a method, and then we're going to look at the code and like kind of like see if we can understand what's going on. So I'm going to save this to a local variable, and I'm going to create a new status update object. Looks like it's got an argument of a string. Great, I can see that I do get this status update object. And if we look here at, at our initialize method, it looks like, okay, there was a comments instance variable initialized, and we had a body, which we passed in as an argument. Okay, that seems like pretty straightforward. So now we will actually like see if we can like run some of the behavior that exists on this class. So I want to run this display method. Okay, cool. That looks like it prints something out to the screen for me with my body there. Cool. And then it looks like I can add some comments. So I'm going to just copy and paste a few of those in. Cool. I might just like come up with my own comments. Oh, cool. Wow, modules save me quite a bit of time. All right, and it looks like I'm getting like some functionality putting to the screen here, and then I'm getting a nil return value. So if we go and we look at the code for add comment here, I can see that, yep, there's an argument passed in, all right. Okay, now it looks like it references the comments instance variable, which at this point is a hash. And then it basically sets this next comment ID and assigns that to a comment, all right? Next comment ID, okay, so this is like, this method runs as the key, set for this hash. So basically it checks if there are comments and we'll add 1 to it if this is 0, if we're on our first one, or it'll take the key of the last comment that I had and then add 1 to that, so that I have like a new comment ID each time I go and set this value. And then it also kind of like tells me what I have in here. And maybe I also, let's look at this output now back on the screen. Cool, we can see that the ID is working because total of 1 comments, then the second one total of 2. So this seems pretty straightforward to me. Any questions about like what the code is doing here? Cool. All right, so let's move on then. So I want to do another display, and then, let me get all of these in here just so that we have the right number. So I'm going to copy and paste these into my Praia session. So great. So now if I look at my object, now I can see, okay, I'm still working with a status update object. There's some comments in here. Great. I can still run my display method. Cool. And now things are a bit different. It's both updating my body and all of my comments in this message. And then the next thing that I can do is I can remove a comment with an argument. So let's run that and just see kind of like what's going on with that method. Okay, deleted comment with ID 3. Comment count now at 3. So that looks like it tells me which, this number right here, this argument was an ID that's going to remove the comments or the comment at that ID, and then also delete, tell me like, hey, this was deleted, the comment count is now at whatever the total number of comments, and I can check to see that if that worked by just doing a display. And now I can see, okay, there is no comment at ID number 3. That one was actually removed and deleted from my hash, but now I have 1, 2, and 4. Other questions on like what this functionality does here? Okay, cool. So now we've got another class in here. And here's what I want y'all to do. I want y'all to do this on your own. We're not going to go into breakout groups. I want you to run this in Praia and get to a point where you've kind of like run through all this functionality. You've looked at the code kind of the same way that we have, where each time you look at a method, you can like kind of understand what's going on under the hood here. And we'll come back together and chat about some of that. So let's take like probably like 3 minutes on this. Remember, the way that I dropped into this Praia session is I was at the root level and I just typed Praia, and then this code should run. So let's take like 3 minutes and then we'll come back together. I want to get y'all a chance to get your hands going. All right, I'm gonna drop some questions into the chat. 2 of them are in the lesson plan right here at the Turn and Talk. And I wanna give you all a chance to kind of like talk about what you see going on in these classes and see what the difference is, what similarities you're seeing, and then think about the design principles that we've talked about in the past. They could be any design principles you've heard us talk about, and think about like, what are we breaking with these two classes in their current implementation. And then the other thing I want you to think about are like, what questions do you have about this code? Like, if you have any questions about it, like, let's talk about that. So I'm gonna put y'all in breakout rooms. We'll take like 5 minutes or so to discuss these, and then we'll come back and talk about it as a group. Okay, it looks like we've got everybody back. So I'd love to hear from a few groups that, you know, had some interesting things to say. I'll let y'all volunteer for this one if you want to talk about like the design principles that you believe that we're breaking, or what similarities and differences you saw between the status update and photo class.
We noticed that in the 2 classes, essentially the methods for adding comment, removing comment, next comment are literally identical, minus the actual content that's being put in there as far as the verbiage. But the methods themselves are pretty much the same, which to me would make it a good candidate for a module, because now you're just housing those methods that you can call in the specific class.
Gotcha. So when you say verbiage is slightly different, which parts did you see that were like slightly different?
I guess now looking at it,
I think she
was referencing like what was being put to the terminal, maybe. I had a hard time, honestly, figuring that out at first. The terminal output.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I was looking, because I'm looking at it like as you were talking, I was like, I wonder if they are, but I think that these are the same. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think they're the same. I just wanted to clarify. Cool. Yeah.
I think where it says photo, and then in the other one, I think it says body, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, I see. You're talking about this display method.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Got it. Yep, totally. So this display method to me looks like some differences there, but mostly like just depending on which class. It's a slight difference. Cool. Yeah, let's hear from Angela.
Hey, something we talked about was that if we were to extract those methods into a module as like extracting behavior so we don't have to repeat our code, we noticed that they depend on the comments hash to be named comments. Is that something that you'd have to be careful of when you're mixing that module into your classes?
Totally. So that's a great thing that you pointed out. And the yes is the short answer. And then the long answer is kind of if you are looking at including a module or including a method from a module, that in turn depends on a method being defined, because we have to think like the way that comments is being called right here, it could only be called like this if there's a local variable or a method. It's plain to see that there's no local variable, right? Comments. So that means that it's relying on at the adder reader of comments being defined on the class that it's included in. So that's like something like a great attention to detail of thinking like, hey, if I include, if I package this up as a module and then include it in my class, I better have a comments method defined, right? In this case, in both cases, it's an adder reader referencing the @comments hash. And that's kind of like the way that it should be used throughout the class, because you can see like the hash syntax here of how we set a key value pair. But like it doesn't, the one thing I want to say is it doesn't have to be an adder reader, right? Like comments could be defined as a method, and then we would rely on it slightly different. But whatever it is, whether it's an adder reader or it's an instance method that we've defined here, we better have it defined. Otherwise, it's definitely going to error when we call it.
And just to clarify, when you're saying it better be defined, it should be defined within the class that we're calling or like using it in. It should be defined within the module. Can it even be defined within the module? Like, I guess that's a little, like would comments be defined within photo and the module would be separate?
Yeah, I love this question. So both will work. So it could be defined as a method on the module, or it could be defined as a method on the class. The thing to remember is modules don't have state. So if it's going to be defined in the module, it has to be defined kind of like the way that we define instance methods here in Ruby, right? With the def syntax, because there's never going to be an adder reader in a module, because adder readers always access our instance variables, and that is by definition state, right? Like that is state. So the only way that you could access state from a method that's defined in the module is if that state is defined on the class where the module is included. Yep. Great question. Cool. What anything else coming up? Because these are like, these details are kind of like the whole reason I wanted to get y'all to ask about this stuff.
Tim, in the modules, the instance variables cannot be accessed because it's all about the state. But what about, is it the same for global variables as well?
That's a good question. I would say like, I'm not positive on this, like whether you can access that like a global variable from within a module. I would think yes, just by definition, like the globalness of it. But like I encourage you to like set a global variable and see if you like play around with how you can access it in a module. But the thing to remember here is from within the module, there's a reason why we don't access, why we wouldn't do this, right? Because we wouldn't want this in a method that's defined in the module, right? Because this like directly references the state. So we wouldn't have this instance variable defined on the module. So instead we use the method syntax, because the method syntax kind of is like a slight workaround for us to get some state in whatever class that this module is included in. All right, and so we haven't even done any of this, so we're kind of like slightly getting ahead, so sorry about that. But when we do get into that, like this is all gonna like kind of like matter.
If it was at comments, would it technically just keep on replacing the same information in the hash? Like it would never, there would be no brand new information. It would just be this, like that same next comment ID and comment, and it would just keep replacing it.
I don't know what the error would be, to be honest. Like, I'm not sure, but we can like play around with that when we implement it and see like what happens. But like, even if it doesn't, like what I'm worried about is like Ruby sometimes like just like makes stuff work. So I'm worried that at comments would work even though we have it defined as like instance variable in the module, but like that would just by definition be breaking the convention that modules don't use state. So we would never do that. Like we would just, even if it works, like you just don't do it. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I want to do something slightly different this time. So if we go back to the lesson plan, here's what I really want you to do. Before we go implement a module for some of this duplicating code, I want you all to have some time to actually look at this documentation. So I want you to be able to look at comparable, and I want you to be able to look at enumerable, and then I want you to jot down what questions you might have about how these modules are implemented, and then I want you to maybe like think of some examples of when you've used either of these two modules, like doing things in Ruby, doing anything in Ruby. All right, so what I'll do is I'm gonna put you in breakout rooms, and we're gonna be in there for probably like 15 or so minutes. I want you to spend the first like 7 or 8 minutes on your own, kind of like you doing some of your own research, like looking at this and saying like, okay, like let's look, all right, like read through this, see if you can like find some things that like you're like, okay, I understand this, but I have more questions on this. And then similarly, spend like half the time on comparable and then half the time on enumerable. So like I would say like 5 minutes comparable, 5 minutes enumerable, 5 minutes discuss with your breakout room partner. All right, and let's take a break before we go do that. Let's come back at 10:01, and then we'll jump into that from there.
Thank you, 1001.
Thanks, 10:01. All right, it's 10:01. So we're gonna jump in these breakout rooms. The one thing I wanted to address is Philip was like, oh, I can see what's different. The instance variables are different. Yes, that is another thing I just want to like reiterate, like, yes, you're correct. The instance variable of @comments in each of these two classes are going to have different state, right? They're going to hold different state, and they are, yes, they're named the same, but they belong to instances of either status update or photo, okay? So I just want to point that out. Cool. All right. Remember, 5 minutes enumerable, 5 minutes comparable, 5 minutes discuss stuff that came up. And this can be like anything. This is kind of like meant to like explore whatever parts of it you want, discuss whatever parts of it you want. All right. And I'm going to be happy to answer questions when we get back. Okay, cool. Let me open these rooms. Just got to make one adjustment. 8. Cool. All right, we'll be back at 17. All right, looks like we've got everyone back. So yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone, like questions, concerns, things you notice that you want to share with the group about either enumerable or comparable. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I have a question. So in the comparable example, they have an adder reader that just says adder. There's no reader, writer, or accessor. My Googling says it's synonymous with an adder reader, but I'd never seen that before. Would you be able to elaborate a little bit on what that is?
Yeah, I also like haven't seen that before, but it looks like to me that like it's providing access to the at string in like a different syntax where it's shortened. Yeah, I I think I would trust that your Googling is probably right, where it's like it's just it's a different shorthand of reader. But the other thing I'm thinking is maybe it gives you access to all of them is like the other thing that comes to mind. Maybe this syntax is like, okay, reader, writer, and accessor, like kind of like all combined, so you get all of it is what I
Okay.
could see as a possibility.
Interesting. Okay, I'll do some
Yeah.
more looking. Thanks.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Arike.
I wanted to like share an analogy that me and my pair came up with that like was really helpful. Well, to me, I'll speak for myself. It was just like these modules are act like straws, and like the classes can like form the spitball or hold or like land the spitball, but like you actually just have to pass it through the straw. And so like what we noticed in our between what's the same between comparable and enumerable was that it has to be called on an object that exists elsewhere. Like it actually doesn't work unless it's attached to an object somehow. And objects are in fact state. Like they like hold that, they can hold state and behavior, but comparable was doing a lot of like Boolean kind of magic, whereas like enumerable was doing a lot of like iteration magic. And that was like what it was, just like, oh, these are the straws. Like they can't actually function unless we give them our object, which is that spitball. And then at the other end comes this like, you know, like the information that we want that still is stored within the class, not within the module.
Yep, I love that analogy. And what I want to key points I want to point out is like the methods, whether they exist in the class or they exist in a module that you've included into that class, the methods still run on objects. Like enumerable is a module where each is defined, yet each still runs on arrays, hashes, or ranges, right? It still runs on the object that is part of a class. So we've included enumerable in the array class, in the hash class, but we still need an array or hash object for that method to run. So the methods still run on objects.
Thank you for that clarity.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, let's hear from Brett.
Yeah, I just noticed last night we were messing around with group by, and chunk seems to kind of do the same thing as group by, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I was just trying to clarify on that.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to answer that because I just don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if chunk and group by are the same. If they are, then
Okay.
Woo, Ruby, same name, different, or same thing, different names. But yeah, probably, I don't know. What else? Anything else about like the modules that you had questions about? Like one thing to note is with these like modules for comparable, like the idea is you're comparing these objects now, so you get this ability to like compare objects to one another. But you have to implement this like spaceship operator to get that functionality, and this is something you don't have to like worry about too much. But I just want you to like be clear, like if you implement comparable, then you need to define an instance method of the spaceship operator. if you implement enumerable, then you would have to, I don't think there's an example, but you would have to define each and show like, hey, this is what each does. And if you define how each works, now you get all these other methods as well. So those are like just some caveats to note. You won't have to worry about that in your modules. It's just something to note about enumerable and comparable. What do we? Yeah, Leah, go ahead.
With enumerables, do we not have to like include them or mix them in because they're like special ones, like at the top of our file?
Oh, with enumerables?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they're already included in the array or hash or range class. So like under the hood, like all those classes are defined in Ruby, and like part of just like running a Ruby file gives you access to like all of those things like under the hood that are defined, but that kind of like come with the standard Ruby library. So
Okay.
so they are actually, so yes, enumerable is actually included in the definition of in the class definition of like array, hash, range, so that then you can, then for us, we can just use them at will, which is kind of nice.
Cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Luke, I saw your hand go up and then down.
You pretty much answered my question. I was going to ask what was the difference between the enumerables that we have been using and a module enumerable, but you pretty much answered that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and the difference is just like where they're defined, really, right? Like we still call them on collections. We call them on objects, whether it's an array object, a hash object. They're defined in a module so that the Ruby maintainers only had to define that functionality once and then give it to the class that needs it. Yep. Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
You said the class, you have to define each. What I don't quite understand what like you mean by that.
Yeah, so basically if you're going to include enumerable, then you need to define the instance method of each. Like you have to define the each method on the class that the enumerable module is included into, and just basically just be like, hey, this is how each works for this class. Once you define how each works, now every other enumerable method will work based on how that each is defined. So this is like, I was kind of worried about telling you all this because I was like, oh, this might confuse them. The idea is like each each is what every other enumerable is built off of. So we need to tell whatever class we include each on how this works. And so it would work slightly different for array and hash, right? Because one has elements, one has key value pairs. So each is actually defined under the hood on those classes slightly differently of like how we iterate. It's iterating the same like each collection. It's just like if you have the hash, you have to split up the key and the value. If you have an array, you just have one element. But they would work slightly different when you're iterating on those things. So you have to, it's like for enumerable and comparable, you have to define the method that all the other methods kind of depend on to look for to work properly.
Are we going to be shown like what that looks like? Because it shows us how to set up comparable on the other page. It doesn't really show us how to set this up on the enumerables page.
Yeah, I'm not going to show you, but I would say like, how is like Google something like how is each defined in Ruby, and like kind of do some self-research on that. And then if you have other questions, like I'm happy to answer them. Cool. Yeah, thanks Praia for dropping that link. Angela, what's up?
I think my question was partially answered by that, but I basically wanted to say like the only time you would include enumerable into a class that you're making would be, initially I thought would be if you're somehow defining a new type of collection that isn't an array or a hash or a range, but also if you're redefining each for some reason, then you'd include enumerable.
You don't, That's a good question. I'm not sure exactly how that would work because you could. I think it would work differently whether or not you included enumerable. If you included enumerable, and then defined each, then you would basically get all the other enumerable methods plus, and they would work the way that you defined each. If you just defined each without including enumerable, then when you called each, it would call into your instance method that you defined, but that method could work basically any way you wanted it to, and you'd be like calling it on an object that you're creating, right? It would be your class creation, so you wouldn't be calling it like on an array, or it would work differently on your class than it would on the array or like the hash. So those two things would be like separate. But yeah, I'm not. I think that's all I want to say about that. Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, Tyler, go ahead.
So I just thought of this kind of analogy in my head and wanted to make sure it was appropriate because it helped me. Can you think of modules as like a helper class? Would that?
I don't like the word class because we want to think of them very separately from what a class is. And we want to think of maybe the module as, you could think of them as a collection of helper methods that are to be included on any class that would benefit from having them. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing though. I think it's always worth like kind of saying how it is in your head, because that helps me like be like, part of that is okay, but another part we don't want to think of it that way. Cool. Yeah, go ahead, Danny.
So with enumerable, like, would we almost do like two different eaches, like an each that would work for an array and then an each that would also work for a hash? Or would you do two separate modules if you were using enumerable and do like one for like the arrays and one for like the hashes?
Yeah, so the way that Ruby has done it, right, is you define the each however you want, and then you also get all of these other enumerable methods based on how you've defined each. And so that's like, so the idea in that case is, nope, we only define it one place, or we only define the enumerable module one place, and then based on the way that you implement each and say, hey, this is how each should work for this collection, then all of those other enumerables come along with that and work a certain way based on how you've implemented each. This is like very like kind of like low level iteration stuff that exists in the Ruby language. And I encourage Philip, if you want to know more about this stuff, like, hey, how does each actually work under the hood everywhere? Like, go to the array class in Ruby, we'll find the each method, see how it's defined, and then do the same thing at hash, compare those two and be like, okay, like this is what it is. Cool. Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
So in order to use a module method, you have to include it in the class. Call it to include.
Yeah, so if you want to use a module method, you include that module, and that module has to have defined that method, and then you can use it as an instance method. So include is for instance methods.
Okay.
There is a way to use methods you defined in a module as class methods, and that is with the extend syntax. All right, and so that is slightly different. I'll say it one more time. If you want to use the methods you define in a module as class methods, then you would use the extend syntax instead of include and then the module name. It would be extend and the module name. All right, and there's like there's some extra reading down here, additional reading at the bottom of the lesson plan. Include versus extend is a good one to look at, and then yeah, I would say all of these are probably worth checking out if you want to know more, because they all like we'll use, they all provide some examples that are probably a little different than the class. What I'll say though is like for what we need you to do and what we want you to do in Mod 1 and probably most of your time at Turing, like you don't need to know all this stuff. It's like a lot of it's nice to know, not need to know. Need to know, you need to know how to chunk up some methods in a module and then include that module into a class. And that's pretty much it. But all of this other stuff is like, oh shit, like nice to know context to help you hopefully understand what modules are doing and really help you with the use case of modules. All right, running out of time, but let's take 5 minutes and come back at 39.
Thank you, 39.
Yeah, thanks, Priya. That was great.
Cool. Let's pick it back up. All right, so I'm going to walk through like us basically taking this code base that we had and turning it into a module. And I'm going to try and mess it up as many times as I can so that you can see how it can be messed up because likely we are going to mess things up before we get them right. All right, so first thing that I want to do is let's get this up and this up. Yeah, we just need to look at one class. Okay, so what I'm gonna do here is, yeah, I'm gonna clear this so you don't see it. All right, so I'm gonna touch commentable.rb right here at the root level of this module example. And so I'm gonna give myself that file. Cool, I'm gonna switch back over to my editor and look at commentable, and I'm going to define this module. So I'm going to say module, similar to like the class keyword, it's keyword in Ruby. Then what we do is define it. This-able isn't necessary, it's convention to show others that, hey, this is a module, and then it requires an end. All right, and so I'm doing that just to give myself a module scope called commentable. Convention also, we like capitalize the word, and I know I'm going to put some methods into this. All right, cool. So now I'll make this full screen and let's put the photo up over here. And let's look at status update. And so highlighted is all of the code that I have decided, hey, this is duplicated. It exists both places. So I'm going to remove this code and put it into my module. All right, and so that's what I'll do is, yeah, highlight it all, cut it, Command X, and put it into my commentable module. All right, and so in theory, because I've done this, these aren't mismatched. I hate when the linter screws up. All right, so in theory, now that I have it here, I should be able to include this module into status update and get all of the functionality that I need. So I'll include commentable, and now I should be able to get all of this functionality back. All right, so this is the keyword here, include, and then this is the name of the module, and I include it into the class, generally another convention, up at the top of the class so that we can see right away, hey, this isn't just a status update class, this is a status update class with some commentable methods included in it. All right, cool. Now what I'm going to do is go back to the lesson plan, and I'm just going to grab all of this code that it says to grab here, get back into Praia and try out the interaction pattern below. And I'm gonna just grab what I need for status update here. So we can work on just this alone. And I'm gonna put this in a runner file so it's a little bit easier and see if it can run instead of just doing it right into Praia. Because basically you can think of runner files and then trying it out in Praia as pretty much the same thing, right? We don't have tests and we're doing some things to our objects. So cool, I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna put it into a runner file, which I haven't created, but I need to create. So I'll touch runner.rb. Great. Now I have all this code in here. All right. I'm requiring the status update, I'm requiring the photo. Cool, and then I'm calling all the methods that I moved. So let's put status update over here so we can look at it. And remember, all of this stuff exists in commentable, right? I'll put this one down here. So all of these methods should be included right here in status update. All right, so in theory, now the code should run, right? If I run this runner file, in theory, I should get access to everything. Like I've been telling you all, this is how modules work. So in theory, it better work, right? Great, an error. That's not what you want if you're a student and you're learning something new. But remember, we can read these error messages and we can probably figure it out. All right, so it looks like it starts on the first line of runner. So that looks like when I required status update, something went wrong. Cool, and I don't have to worry about this. This is all Ruby stuff, but now I can get into the code that I wrote, which is, okay, required status update, and then in here, status update line number 2, class status update, uninitialized constant, where in status update, what commentable. Okay, did you mean comparable? So Ruby already knows about comparable, so it's like you might have tried to include this, but I didn't. I want commentable. We got to do something up here, which is require my file where commentable lives. All right, and so that's the big thing here. It doesn't know, if it doesn't know about a constant that I'm trying to access here within the class, then that means I need to require that. All right, great. Let's see if I can run this code now. Put it here. Look at that. All right, so it looks like as I ran my code, this status update here, all of this code worked as intended, right? Now it's all working kind of like we're displaying what we have. First we have the body, then we added some comments. Great, that worked perfect. Then we did another status update display, and then we removed a comment, and then we did another status update display, and sure enough, oh cool, got removed as the final thing. Great. That looks like it's working the way that I want it to. So cool, moving on. Let's grab this next portion, which is the photo. Let's grab this next portion, which is the photo. I'm just gonna paste this code in and we'll see what I need to do, right? Like we'll see, I know that the status stuff is gonna run. So actually I might just comment this out because we can see that this already ran right? And what else I need to do? So right now, everything I expect everything to work right now because within photo, I haven't removed any of these methods, right? I haven't removed any of the duplication. So at this point, I think it should work. I haven't included a module in this class yet. Oh, yep, I did, sorry. Let's get rid of it. I haven't included a module in this class yet. So all of these methods exist on the instance of photo. When I run it, sure enough, okay, everything looks like it's like working properly. So now I need to like actually make my moves. So at this point, I'm going to simply delete what I have here that is incommentable, right? I don't need all of this duplication anymore. So I will delete it from photo. And then what I'll do is I will include commentable here. So give me a show of hands if you think that this will run perfectly at this point. Hand up if you think it's gonna run. All right, I see some thumbs down, some head shaking. Anyone think that this will run? We've got 100% of you that think that this will not run. All right, let's give it a shot. This is what I love about code. Just when you thought you knew what it was going to do, it goes ahead and really tricks you. So this is just like a caveat that like I actually just figured out while y'all were on the breakout room, because I thought the same thing. So don't think that you're that like I just like know things. No, I figured this out. So when we require status update, remember what we're doing here. We're running this runner file. So when we require status update, and in status update, commentable is also required, we get that too. So commentable comes along with it in line 1. So now, even though we're not requiring it at the top of photo, within the scope of the runner file, we still get all the commentable code. So that's just like a caveat. Still, what I would do, because you don't know, like these two files don't depend on each other, right? Status update and photo. So what I would still do is I would still require this at the top of my photo class, because there might be a place in my code later on where I only require in photo and I don't require in status update. So at that point, I would need this required to exist right here. All right. Yeah, and like this is like the meat and potatoes of the module right here, right? It's like now if I uncomment this and I run this one more time, I get it all for photo, I get all of these things, and I get it all for status update. I get all these methods in both classes. Now, both those classes are, you know, only the differences really are what is defined on those objects, and all of the similarities are in that module, and I'm including that module in multiple places. All right. Yeah, questions coming up on this? Any of it? Can put. Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
Just a quick question. Like, say we wanted to include a module in our project. Where do modules normally live, as far as like where the file lives? Is it at like the base level, or would it be in your lib?
This is going to change when you get to Rails. For now, put it in the lib, but just know that like where we define them in Rails like will be different. Yeah, Drew, go ahead.
If you accidentally define a module as a module that already existed, which one would take responsibility or not? I mean, you know what I'm asking, I guess.
That's a great question. I do not know, but we can try it. I like when you all think of these weird situations. So let's call this comparable. And yeah, let's just run it and see what happens. Uninitial up. I have to also change it here. And let's change it in photo too. The file name is still the same. I don't need to change this, but I would if I was gonna, yeah, actually see. Okay, so it looks like I can override comparable like this in this way. Even though it's defined under the hood, it looks like it looks for my definition of my modules before it looks for Ruby's definition of modules. Cool, fun question. Any other things coming up? Okay, let's back to the lesson plan. To be completely honest, this exercise I do not think is worth your time. I think that this like car example is literally the same thing as I just did, and I don't think that like this is so crazy of an idea that you really need to see it like a bunch of different ways. So what I'll say is I think that you all diving into comparable and enumerable was more valuable for this lesson, and so that's why I went that route. Okay, but what did I want to say? There's a couple of things. Okay, these two things. Let's answer these just to wrap up. What is a module and how is it different than a class? Anyone wants to raise their hand and give me their best summation in words? Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
I would say a module is a collection of methods that can be universally applied to files when they're called.
Cool. Collection of methods that can be applied to classes when they are included. This is the only thing I'll say. And then how is it different than a class? Do you want to take this or you want to hand off?
I'll hand it off.
Okay, cool. Brett's hand went down quick. Cool. How is it different than a class? Cool, it's back up. Yeah, let's go with Brett.
It doesn't have a state, and yeah, so you can pretty much only call its modules to be used on a class.
Yeah, great. So no state in a module. So you can only use those methods if they are included in a class and you have some object to work with, right? You either have the class or you have an instance of the class, but you need one of those two things. You can never just like do like a my module dot and then the method name, right? You need that module to be associated with a class so that it has an object to run on. What else did I want to say? Oh, Praia, like I feared, this will work, which you honestly hate to see. If I change these comments to instance variable comments, and here I'll show you why it works. But this works. Actually, let's just run it so that I'm not lying. So you know I'm not lying to you. It all works, even though I have this instance variable defined here, and this is just like a poor pattern. But if I pry in, I can tell you why it works. So I'm within the add comment method within a module, right? And at this point, what is self? It's a status update object. So self is the object that I included the module on and then called this method on, all right? So at this point, at comments exist on self, so it works this way. However, this wouldn't work unless the, the object that you're including it on had access to an instance variable that was defined on it. So this is a bad pattern. Don't do this. No instance variables in the code. It works in this case, in this scenario, because of what the current object is when add comment is called. It would not work if, where do I want to remove it in status update? It would not work if this were not defined, right? If I don't have the instance variable at comments defined on the object that calls into this add comment method, then this isn't going to work. And I'll show you that. Right. Undefined method each, not what I expected, for nil class, no method error. That looks like status update 16, display. Not what I expected, to be completely honest.
Did you define each anywhere?
I didn't, but I think it's being called on 16 in status update. So the first thing it's called on is this comments, which isn't necessarily, it's because comments now doesn't have access to this. So we didn't even get into the add comment. Let's see what happens if we get into the add comment. Pry, exit. Cool, this is what I thought we were gonna get. Undefined method, count for nil class. So we can't do this thing when it's not defined, basically. Yeah. Go ahead, Brett.
So can you, like, if I have a module like chunk per based off ID for like whatever, and then I can iterate through that module as well within my class.
Say it one more
Does that
time,
make
sorry.
sense? Could I iterate through a module within a specific class?
No, because you wouldn't iterate through a module. You would iterate through a collection of some kind.
Through the collection. But the module would give me the collection, I guess.
You're talking about like if you included enumerable.
Yeah.
So if you included enumerable, you basically give yourself a way to iterate on the objects that you define. So you would basically define like a new collection type of class, like that wasn't an array, a hash, or a range. Then you would include enumerable. Then you would define each how to iterate over that collection. But then you would still need the instance of the class that you're creating and including enumerable on to be able to iterate. And it would have to like work kind of like a collection works.
Okay.
Yeah, so you would think like if you're ever gonna like include enumerable, you want to think of your class as like a collection type class. So it would be like an array, like a hash, like a range. So it would be like a collection, and then you're like, I want my collection. I'm not satisfied with the Ruby data type of array, hash, or range. I'm gonna define my own type of collection, and then I also want all of these nice enumerable methods that come with collections. So I'm gonna include them. I'm going to tell each how to iterate over my type, my data type, and then you would get all the rest. Yeah, go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about the project, and if you can't expand on this, then that's fine. Just let me know. I'm just curious. I imagine the applicability to this right now is that we can use this in our group projects, but I'm imagining that if all the members have their own modules that they're defining, then the initialize within stat tracker would still be quite lengthy, right? Or do you perceive a way around that?
I perceive a way where you possibly are duplicating functionality that exists in the project, and there's a chance for you to extract that into a module and then include that functionality in multiple classes that you need it in.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Travis. Not to get into the weeds as far as the project goes, but like I feel like there's a couple instances where a hash would be needed. So you could create a module for the enumerable hash that is specific to whatever we're doing, and then call that module on each of the classes that would use that hash information.
I don't want to talk about the project too much, but what I'll say is that's more complicated than it needs to be. You just like won't need to do something like you just outlined. Like we don't expect you to try to implement enumerable or comparable anywhere in this project on like some new collection that you're creating. We expect you to like try to find some duplication in the code and then extract that and then include that in the classes that use that code. Yeah. But I like where you're thinking. I like where your head's at as far as like thinking big. But yeah, and these are like good things that I'll say like really dig into them and write them down to remember them for your check-ins, because that's like the best place to like kind of like dive into these specific, because you really need a specific context to see like how you're thinking of the module and then get that specific feedback. All right, that's all for me for now. We will do nested collections at 1. And other than that, we have work time and possibly squishies if you reached out. So yeah, that's all. See ya.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely.